So the next session is something that is crucially important to absolutely all of us, which is about what makes a sustainable home care service. Sustainable home care service. And I'm delighted that we have a very eminent panel here. We have Raina Summerson from Agincare. We have Duncan Berry from Bluebird Care. We have Steve Allen from Friends of the Elderly, and Jane Townson needs no introduction after the last presentation from Somerset Care. Can I just remind you that everybody's mini biographies are in your pack, which is why I'm not introducing people in great length and depth. Each of the panel members has been allocated around 2 minutes to make an introduction. And have been warned that I'm going to bark when they overrun their time, so that we make sure that there's plenty of time left afterwards for your questions and comments to the panel. So could we start with Raina, please?
Can you hear? Is that okay? We haven't tested these.
Can we just test the sound?
Is that okay? Yeah. Okay.
Oh no, we've got a shaking head here. Could you?
No.
Would you mind speaking up?
I'll try. Is that better? Yeah, I'll try not to wave my head around too much. Yeah, my name is Raina Summerson. I'm Chief Executive of Agincare Group. So we have 2 holding companies, one covering care home services, and that ranges from lower level care through to high dependency, and from different age groups from 16 up to over 65s. We then have a community-based care group, and that covers low-level preventative services through home care, as John says, a huge range of domiciliary care services, through to extra care, through to living care, and we have an employment agency and a small nurse supply agency. So we're family owned, so I think the interest in the panel here, we're all very different today. So we're a family owned business, we've been going for over 30 years. Our founder and chairman still works actively in the business, and I have several of his family members in the business. So 2 eldest sons are one in each holding company, and that brings interesting challenges, but it also focuses me very clearly on what is sustainability. So when I'm out looking at acquiring a care home or a business, or applying for a tender, or looking at the viability of our operations, it really does focus, what legacy am I leaving for that second generation? And indeed for the other people across the management team that we're nurturing to be the leaders of the future. So it really does bring that to the forefront. So for me, it's very much about a long-term outlook. So not looking just in the short term, what brings a quick profit now, what looks good now, is that going to be a sustainable service, and what problems might we get along the way? Similarly, a clear vision, mission, values, being really clear about what our objectives are, making sure that we review them regularly, making sure that we risk assess them regularly, but not being swayed by fads or trends, I suppose, looking at this is what we do, this is where we're going, and it might look at sometimes like we're missing out on opportunities because of the sustainability element, but we stick to it. Diversification, we've always been proud from early days to have a diversification of service provision. I think that helps you through the highs and the lows. So when times are tough in a particular area of social care, you can kind of maybe focus on other areas, and it brings different skills into the business and quite a good approach. Strong financial oversight and control is key. Having the right people in the right places, recruitment and retention is obviously an issue for all of us. But I think in a long-term and particularly a family-owned business, that's a really key thing, getting people who buy into that value base, understand the challenges it brings, because believe me, it brings some. Every now and then I'd like to sign up something really nasty for the second generation, but I hold back on that. And I suppose strong external relationship management, and for me that's not just with our commissioners, but that's with your suppliers, with the people that you're going to work with over years, because again, they need your support going forward, and you need theirs. Overall, hard work, really hard work, and passion. I think passion for what you do. I don't think anyone can survive in social care if you don't have a tremendous passion and point other people who have a similar passion.
Thank you, Raina. Can I now call on Duncan Berry from Bluebird Care? Duncan.
Morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay on this. Yeah, Duncan Berry from Bluebird Care. I probably should put my hand up straight away and claim not to have spent as much time as everybody else in the care sector. My background is franchising, but I've been involved with Bluebird Care now for a little under 2.5 years. As a business, we operate a franchise business model, like a number of other colleagues in the room today. We have a little over 200 businesses across the UK and Ireland, which represent around about 175 franchisees. And the question of certainly sustainable home care is one that's certainly very much to the fore in our business, because in essence what we have are 175 business owners who've all themselves invested 5-6-figure sums into their business in order to be able to bring the excellent service of Bluebird Care into that particular area. We are part of a larger group. We have sister companies in Australia, in the US as well. The US slightly a lot larger, Australia a little smaller, and Just Better Care. But from our point of view as the franchisor, the role that we have is looking to help support these franchisees to ensure that the sustainability, the economic sustainability, long term of their business is very much there. They're committing to the brand for 5 years. They have opportunity to renew that. So it's hugely important from our point of view in supporting them that the range of services that we provide across the community, which live-in care, the domiciliary side, looking at dementia certainly is one that franchisees do. There's been organic growth from franchisees in terms of other areas that they've gone into, but ultimately it's ensuring that there is sustainability there for their businesses, as that's fundamentally important to them. They've invested, as I say, considerable amounts within the brand for their business to be able to grow.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Steve Allen from Friends of the Elderly.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I started a single branch in 2001, and if I'm honest, sustainability back then was about survival, making sure national insurance was paid, no luxury or foresight or planning, and I think as many as you will recognise in this room, all of you probably, just hard graft and making your own luck. But as we grew to about 10 branches, we all have these breakthrough moments, and ours was our first large contract, or getting Investors in People Gold or the National Training Awards. And from that, I think you develop your vision, your mission, and your values, and you build upon that. And that is your innate sustainability, in my view. But then as we grew with private equity, came financial conditions, and sustainability then was redefined about margins and key performance indicators and 3 to 5 year horizons. And I thought we were, if I'm honest, no longer entrepreneurial, but still selling the strong values of a family-led company. So I think that was a difficult time in terms of the juxtaposition between outcomes and outputs. But after coming back from early retirement, I'm now running Friends of the Elderly, a national charity that runs care homes, day centres, extra care accommodation, grant programmes, stroke projects and national befriending. And what I'm finding, picking up from John's point I think earlier, is that home care has the ability to bring them all together, all of our services. So home care becoming sustainable through its connectivity to others and the positive effect that it has on our other services, so that we can be more relevant to more clients and more beneficiaries, as we term in the third sector. We've just landed our new Friends of the Elderly strategy. That includes a strategic objective around financial sustainability, and I'll just share some of those headlines with you very quickly. The first one is about reputation, and that for me is promoting the organisation as a service and an employer through Google, Facebook and Twitter. And really we're finding that the website is no longer the first port of call. Social media is about that later. I think my microphone's gone. The second one is a piece of work we've done around safeguarding with the Social Care Institute for Excellence to ensure that our Safeguarding Adults Board makes it ours a safe place in which to work with an open and transparent culture. And the third one I think is recognising and supporting what a great job all of our care workers do with a higher acuity workload, with end-of-life care, life-limiting illnesses and comorbidity and dementia increasing through public commissioning thresholds increasing. Technology, briefly, I'm lucky enough to chair one of the government's digital catapult centres, and there I'm learning all about developments in 5G, immersive technologies, learning about millennials working to live, not living to work, future transport, wearables, devices, data-driven decisions about where your next branch should be. So just keep an eye on technology. As a charity, we're able to do a lot of community engagement. So I think mapping your assets in your community allow you to signpost your services to those assets, the assets of what we call the head, the heart, and the hand. And I think that allows you to deliver perhaps differently under the Social Value Act. And I won't talk too much about recruitment and retention. That's a workshop later on. But I think for me it's about negotiation, being prepared to hand back contracts. We've worked with Anthony Collins to hand back, I thought we were going to hand back 4 of our 5 contracts. And in fact, the result was the local authority wanted us to keep them, and we did contra deals about offices and contribution towards recruitment costs. So I think that's been really interesting, and the UKHCA costing model has been fundamental in that negotiating position. And lastly, on recruitment and retention, I think internal referrals, staff benefit brochures, multi-demographic use of social media, and if I leave with one thought, for me it's about sustainability for the future will be how you handle this mixture between the demographics of the availability of a working age population and those requiring care, and how you offer that out to your workforce in recruitment terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And finally, Jane Townson from Somerset Care.
So Somerset Care is a not-for-profit social enterprise, and it was formed 26 years ago when Somerset County Council decided to outsource provision of adult social care. And since then we've expanded and are now operating across southern England, Wiltshire, Dorset, Hampshire, Surrey, Isle of Wight, Bath and North East Somerset, and so on. I've been asked to talk about sustainability from the point of view of reducing reliance on local authority contracts in home care and growing the business for self-funders. But you have to think carefully how to do this. Over the last 2 years, we've actually handed back 7 out of 10 of our loss-making local authority contracts, and we're gradually increasing the proportion of self-funded home care we deliver. For many years before this, we had exhorted our home care teams to build their private market. And even though they tried, with the best will in the world, we never got beyond 10% in any given week. And the reason is that local authority contracts tend to be all-consuming, and anybody who you can recruit gets sucked into the hamster wheel of doom, as I call it, and their needs always prevail. So what we decided to do in the end was to create a completely separate brand called Willows for our self-funded home care, to experiment with how delivering home care could be made enjoyable for carers, because a lot of the time it's not that enjoyable on these large local authority contracts. Frankly, it's just a complete chaotic nightmare a lot of the time. And so in the time I've got available, I just want to talk about 3 things: money, quality, and workforce. So local authority work is low margin, high volume. The self-funder model tends to be higher margin, low volume. The financial models are very different, and that influences the operating model. So the first message is, don't think that you can simply transfer your local authority ways of working to the self-funder market. The second point is quality. Shifting to the self-funder market requires a culture change for carers, given the traditional background of time and task commissioning that John talked about. Instead of being handed a list of time and tasks by social workers, now we're focusing on the outcomes because people are paying for their own care. Quite often, as it turns out, it's not about care at all. It's about company and social engagement. And so our carers have found themselves going out chasing seagulls and going on trips to theme parks. So they're thinking that this is great. And obviously, if people fund their own care and support, they have high expectations. Any complaints you've got to take very seriously, and your business won't grow because word of mouth really matters in this market. So I should have mentioned, we have a training subsidiary company, and we've always invested hugely in training in Somerset Care. But in this particular market, we're really focusing on those appreciative inquiry skills, what's really important for that person, and also customer service skills. So workforce is really the third area that is key for sustainability. We've set very high standards for the carers in our Willows team. They have to have high-level qualifications and undertake extra training. They also have to have a customer-focused attitude. They're working in self-managed teams of 12 to 20 in quite tight geographic areas, so they're not having to drive 500 miles a week like some of our carers on local authority contracts are. The customers book time slots like you do on online grocery shopping, and the carers manage the rotas based on how the customers book. We're experimenting with incentivising carers with profit share, but to be honest with you, it isn't really money that motivates them. It's the feeling that they're really helping. And we're enabling with technology as well, so we're just rolling out a mobile app. And in the last 10 months, we've only lost one carer from our very first Willows team, whereas normally we can have turnover rates up to 40% on local authority contracts. So I think just if you want to shift, you need to think about the financial and operating model, which is different, the culture and the quality, which is different, and the workforce and what motivates them.
Excuse me. Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll agree, for people coming from slightly different angles, but with some very clear messages for us around sustainability. So we now have a few minutes while I grab a glass of water. We now have a few minutes for questions from the floor. We have roving mics. So we have a question at the back there from Richard. Oh, bless you.
Hello, Richard Walker, Optimo Care Group. I'd like to return to the theme of commissioners and commissioning that John pointed to. It feels to me that there's lots of stories in this room and across the broader membership around commissioner practice, and I don't want to start finding the villain of the week kind of approach, but commissioners are massively affecting the state-funded home care market and how we all operate, and these are external factors that we need to challenge. How do the panel think we can move away from a villain point and actually start to aggregate this information and use this positively to highlight the commissioning practices across the UK that are causing problems for this market that are above and beyond the pound for care?
Who would like to respond?
I guess from Bluebird, Richard, from Bluebird Care's perspective, our business is largely 75% from a private side of things. So our franchisees and their team's involvement with commission is perhaps less than some of the panellists from this point of view. It is an element that we do get involved in from the early days of our franchisees' business, in so much as when they're looking to bring the business to market, they're looking to recruit their carers. It's a way of enabling them to at least get a foothold in the market, get some work, and be able to move on from there. I think by and large, from the experience they have, it's a mixed bag from our experience with commissioners. It's something whereby the amounts that the Bluebird Care offices would be charging customers may be too rich for people's blood, as it were, in terms of they may not be willing to do that. And in instances, we've had franchisees who've given back large contracts because of the business mix that they have is one that they see as being long-term damaging to how they want to grow the business. So they're having to have an ongoing balance, if you like, within their business as to what extent they are willing, able, wanting to take on that commissioning work. But I suggest from our point of view, we have that position to be a little different, given 75% on average of the business is private.
I think both Raina and Jane want to come in. Jane, do you want to go first?
Yeah, our approach, Richard, has been we tried first of all to engage with the commissioners to talk about doing things differently, but that didn't get anywhere. So we've just decided to create our own pilots, do our own experiments, generate data, and then go back to them with the evidence and say, look, this works. And then hopefully try and persuade them that way. It's beginning to work in some areas of residential care. We've still got a way to go in home care, but our vision is ultimately we'll be working the Willows way for our whole home care offering, not just for the self-funders.
And Raina?
I think from our perspective, it's really difficult, I think, if your business model has been based on largely local authority. Ours is about 80% local authority. And I suppose the way we've tried to send messages about the challenges of that is looking at the rationales for any contracts that we're bidding for. And we have had an extraordinarily high rate of no bids voted for by our management team increasingly every year. So we hope to send a message. We normally follow that up with a letter to explain to the local authority why we've made that decision, and to say we're interested in the work, we believe we can do it, but we don't believe we can do it on the terms. And I think increasingly it's not just about price, it's about the terms of the contracts and the specifications and the burden that places on people. Feed in, obviously, to the UKHCA and share that information so that, again, they can see. And I think, again, in the recent months, I would say I think we've had one or two authorities where they have ended up not being able to award a tender because enough people have not bid. And I know that the UKHCA can't say it enough. There is something about a collective attitude here, and I think there is that. It's a really strong message. It's one that's talked about nationally. There are certainly pockets of the country where care provision is increasingly hard. So I think the relationship at a local level, the relationship management and honest and open discussions is really, really key. Telling the local authority why you're not bidding for the work or why you're unable to, sharing that with the UKHCA and hopefully changing things. And I know for some people who work in limited geographical areas that's incredibly difficult to do, but and then as we've kind of touched on, diversifying and trying to look at different ways of still operating outside of those conditions.
Thank you. And Steve, I think you wanted to come in too.
Yeah, so my background has been from a private-led organisation with 50-50 split, private local authority, to a charity which was 80% local authority. So I think it was interesting for me joining a larger organisation that I sort of had the freedom and flexibility to go back and say, we will withdraw from these contracts and mean it. And I think that's the difference. If you're a small organisation, it's tough to do that when you've got one large client. But we worked closely with again, I said the team with Anthony Collins. We linked it in to a calculation of what we wanted versus the UKHCA fair price for pay. And we made our reasons known, and we made sure we were prepared to walk away from that and make contingency plans for walking away. But what we found in all but one local borough, which is as mad as a box of frogs anyway, I suggest that. Certainly in one unitary authority, they've come up and said, well, we don't have any more money, but we do have an unused premises where you could base your office and your staff training. We do have a subsidy we can give you of £600 to £750 for every new carer to help with training and background checks. And we also have a sort of a bonus almost, we don't use that word, but I do, in terms of linking it to outcomes as a quarterly payment. And so they can't change their bottom line retrospectively on a 3-year contract, but what they can do is reset the terms of that contract in terms of their budgets if you're prepared to walk away. But I think that's the tough thing, being prepared to walk away and bear the consequences.
Well, there's a very full answer to that question. Other questions, please? Avril.
Avril Mayhew from the Local Government Association. It was just a question to a colleague from Somerset Care. When you described Willow's service, you talked about taking complaints seriously, investing in training, extra training for staff, customer focus. Aren't those standards we would all want to achieve across the board, regardless of where their funding source comes from?
Yes, of course. And we actually were the first independent provider to train all of our managers and supervisors with the local government ombudsman training in complaints handling. But all I'm trying to say is that when you're working for people paying for themselves, you have more time, and so you can get into more depth with them. If local authority is giving you 15, 30 minutes and a list of tasks, it's really, really difficult to get that personalisation that John was talking about. You really can't do it. And I think, I think we're nationally, there isn't a single home care provider that I'm aware of that's doing more than 50% local authority funded work that's managed to get outstanding from CQC yet. And and it's almost impossible under the terms that these contracts are commissioned. But as I said, our vision is that we do this for our whole service. We just haven't been able to persuade the local authorities to enable us to work like this. You know, we're still being given lists of time and tasks. So, yeah.
Does anyone else want to come in on that question?
I suppose just to, you know, in terms of openness and honesty, I think no one would argue with what you're saying. We're all here because we want to deliver a quality service, and I think part of the increased representation and lobbying in recent years has been because those things are under pressure, and there's enough research around that clearly identifies, you know, the challenges for the staff working in this environment, over which, as John's pointed out, you know, as providers, we often find we have little control. So I think that's the struggle we're trying to do, is not have those things eroded, because you're quite right, it shouldn't be an unlevel playing field.
And so I'd say it's not just about the money, it's about the procurement and the commissioning.
Just carrying on that sort of theme, I mean, it is a fact, unless it's changed this month, it is a fact that there is no home care provider predominantly providing to the state-funded market who has achieved a CQC outstanding rating. And I think it's fair to say that Andrea Sutcliffe kind of recognises that. Yeah, we have one. Well done. Right, okay, well done. Well done them. Okay, there's one. But in terms of, you know, there are proportionately more home care providers that have achieved outstandings than other forms of social care. But the fact remains that it is doubly hard to do that when you're predominantly providing to the state market. So my question really was, does financial sustainability have any part in achieving an outstanding rating? Or should it? Duncan?
Well, I mean, from our point of view, with the 7 outstandings that we've got in England at the moment, I would suggest looking at the broad spectrum there. They are the way the franchisees who've got them, I would suggest it's down to their leadership. It's actually how they go about and approach the inspection process. It is one that the challenge we've got in a franchise, I suppose, is you'll get people of different qualities, different skill sets, different experiences that they bring to the business, and some people will be less inclined to be more forthcoming or frankly banging the drum about just what a good job they do in their own business. But I think from what we've seen within Bluebird Care, at least, those franchisees who spend the time to perhaps impose themselves a little more on their inspector to help let them see and take them through what it is they want them to see that's happening within their business has been really a hugely important part of it, which I wouldn't necessarily say is linked wholly to the sustainable piece. That's really down to them as individuals and how they've managed the element of their business, impressing upon them exactly what they do in the community with various services there, impressing upon them the investments they make within the training for their carers and the office staff, in terms of putting money back into the business and being able to evidence that, I think is hugely important. As well as having seen that happen in the likes of the Camden franchise recently, appealing and getting an outstanding in a market which is a very difficult one from that point of view, again has been extremely satisfying to see. But I wouldn't necessarily directly link the success of outstanding to the sustainability.
Thank you, Steve.
And if I could pick that up from a third sector channel perspective, I think it partly depends on your definition of financial sustainability. Because one way we look at this perhaps is that some of our range of domiciliary care services would be sustainable if they didn't make a profit. They simply covered our central overhead. And even in some cases, if they made a small loss, we have to have as a charity some charitable objectives, some philanthropy to provide from our profit, from our surplus. And so I think for me, it's interesting to explore this space between, profit and break-even and even loss. And once you can start to look into that, you can start to talk about the social value of other services that you provide. One of the things that we're looking at doing as part of our strategy, we had a service called Visiting friends, which didn't do personal care. It was companionship and shopping tasks. All those things which are not commissioned as essential or critical, but we know they are absolutely necessary. Well, is that perhaps in the future where we step in as a third sector, not funding the public purse, but actually just saying this is perhaps where we should intervene as a charity? And if we can do that and cover our central overhead in today's climate, that might be good enough for us.
Thank you. Jane.
I just want to make a couple of points. One is that the money does matter. Some of us had the pleasure of working in Hampshire, for example, which was paying £14.20 an hour when it started. You try recruiting care workers in Hampshire on £7.50 an hour and keeping them. And if you can't keep your workforce, it's very hard to deliver outstanding quality. So that's one point. Secondly, in the local authority contracts we've worked on, often they've been commissioned on a block contract basis. So social workers will just keep sending you whoever they will send, regardless of who you've got on the ground at the time. So let's say we had 5 people available in Wellington at 7 o'clock on a Friday morning. They could easily send us 10 people who they've told can have care at 7 o'clock in the morning on Friday in Wellington. So you start off with a bunch of unhappy customers. So this is my point about, you know, the customer service being difficult. Then our carers are having to deal with all of that anger. That upsets them. They're getting a million texts and phone calls from the office. Can you squeeze in this? Can you go there? Can you do that? That's what makes them leave. It's the pressure, the hassle, the chaos. And unless those things are addressed, and that isn't necessarily about money, that's about managing supply and demand and how you set up the contracts and what autonomy you give providers to work with the customers directly. So I think that the money does really come into it, but conversely, if your quality is rubbish, you lose money left, right and centre. You know, in residential care, getting a poor CQC rating can easily take £500,000 off the bottom line. It's a bit harder to quantify in home care, but definitely yes.
Thank you. I think we had a question at the back there, and we've probably got time for a couple more.
Cessna Care. Do you think any of this is going to improve all the time that the Care Quality Commission and local government are in bed together?
So, who's going to answer that? I'm tempted to ask Avril, but I don't think I will.
Don't quite know. No.
The Care Quality Commission at the moment isn't focused on commissioning. They're only looking at what providers are doing. And, you know, in fairness, I think they're heading in the right direction in terms of looking at outcomes. And, you know, to get an outstanding rating is really difficult. You've really got to demonstrate that you've improved lives of the people that you're looking after and, you know, that you're managing your customers and all of that. But until somebody is willing to address the way it's all commissioned and procured, we're never going to get to a good place.
And I think what I would add to that is there is a huge amount of work going on commissioning at the moment. I mean, John mentioned something, but actually one of the pieces of work that I'm involved in at the moment has done a bit of mapping of who is looking at commissioning at the moment and who is working towards it being improved. That mapping went to 4 pages. So there is a huge amount of work going on about commissioning, but I think to come back to your point, it's a bit like have you stopped beating your wife, isn't it? Whether you accept that the two are in bed together. But I think unless and until the Care Quality Commission can look at the whole production line, if you like, from the service that the individual client receives right the way up to how it was commissioned, I think until the CQC can do that, then to some extent their hands are tied. And I'm sure that if they were able to do that, that would speed up improvements. I don't think it's the single silver bullet. I think it's very much more complicated than that, but I would certainly say that. Yes.
Isn't one of the problems we've got here not so much the pace of change of commissioners, but actually empowering them to take change, and actually it's the leadership of councils that we need to get the buy-in from. The chief execs, it's not just the directors of adult social care. They are disempowered by and large. It's at a different level. Is that not where the real issue here is?
I actually think that the Local Government Association and ADAS could do more than they are, because nobody is learning from mistakes in one area. You know, we've seen absolute catastrophic commissioning and procurement exercises in one area being replicated almost identically elsewhere. And that kind of learning needs to be shared.
I think there is also a big issue we're finding across the various areas is the amount of interims in place, the amount of vacant posts, restructuring. There's simply not the continuity. And, you know, we talk about sustainable business and we talk, you know, it's the same for the local authorities. It's very hard for us as providers to build sustainable relationships and talk about long-term planning with people who are in interim posts. That doesn't mean it's an excuse, but I think it is a reality. So I agree. And again, a lot of the work the UKHCA has done has been trying to make sure that the message goes to, you know, lead councillors, MPs, so that those messages are reinforced at a higher level, because often you will go into the senior levels and find people have no idea about their commissioning practices and the impact it's having on the community. Which kind of ties into our other big issue in social care about awareness and the public awareness and the representations they make. So, yeah.
And I think this is, when you make the point specifically about the CEOs of local government, I think that's where organisations like the UKHCA come in terms of lobbying, because I'm vice chair of one of the but lobbying is going on really strongly about all the things that those chief execs have to decide on: education, on roads, on infrastructure projects and things like that. And that's why we just have to keep banging the drum in terms of making sure that, that they look. I mean, every local authority that I know of has their graph of doom, which basically shows over time social care swallowing up everything, but for all other funding for roads and potholes and education and everything else. And so they're very aware of it, but it's a massive issue, isn't it? It's not one that I think we can answer adequately for you.
And I would add to that, of course, elected members,
yeah,
who in some councils have very direct and detailed intervention powers, which in my experience are rarely helpful, but I'm sure everyone wouldn't comment on that. I think we have time for one more question. Yes, over here.
Claire O'Donovan, Primera Healthcare. Just be interested in your view. You said there's a lot of work being done on commissioning. There's also a big push by the government to abolish zero-hour contracts, which is very much what our businesses are have been traditionally based on because of time and task-based commissioning. And I'd just like to know the panel's views and yourself.
0 hours contracts.
Yeah, ladies first.
Raina.
Thank you, Duncan. I think from our perspective, I mean, obviously, we all know recruitment retention is a key issue for us, and I think there wouldn't be anyone in this room who wouldn't want to see the people that work in social care get better terms and conditions. And I think that's accepting for some people 0 hours suits, but in many cases it doesn't. It's not providing us with the workforce and the platform we need to develop some services and to develop the consistency. I mean, I think one of the issues is around making sure that central government are aware of the impact of some of the different policy decisions they're making, because obviously we're all coming under attack from different areas of central government activity that doesn't, again, seem to be cognizant of the issues it's going to cause in social care. And I think for me it would be about continuing to ask your staff what they want, try and respond to that, feed that back to commissioners about how that's impacting. And I do, personally, again, I do think that for the last 2 years we've had more recognition from local authorities that the terms and conditions of staff need their assistance in contractual terms to help manage that, whether that's putting more money into their pocket through more money that's given directly to them, helping with recruitment and retention or training issues. So I think it's an ongoing piece of work, but absolutely critical to social care.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, I was with a franchisee earlier this week, and they were saying that having sort of polled their carer team to find out their interest and their appetite to move away from zero-hour contracts to something on a sort of more contract basis, and looking at shift work, 1 out of 70 came back in favour of wanting to do that. And I think we've seen in other franchisees, businesses, there is a real appetite for maintaining that 0-hour contract. They like the fact they know that they're able to work what they want, and then not. It proves challenging to the I think to the office teams in terms of being able to to manage that. And there've been various elements that our franchisees have looked to invest in terms of providing carers with additional funding, if you like, pay, but it's something which is very much, we do find that is very much liked within our workforce, despite looking to try and make attempts to move it on, to let people see, and I guess from an attraction into it, providing an opportunity to have a contract, evening, late shifts, looking to get into it that way. It is starting to have an impact for new recruits coming in, but certainly for those existing, as a general element of it, they like the 0 hours.
We've just undertaken a piece of work to transfer, through consultation, about 100 of our care workers across from the main charity into a wholly owned subsidiary. And there we've had a mixed bag of response, with some union representation as well, where we've sort of developed a sort of hybrid variable hours contract, which does run from a 16-hour minimum if need be, or back through to pure 0 hours, but with a big internal communications piece around that, talking about employment rights and holiday pay, and just making it really clear that when tested in law, this is an employment contract, and if you go into tribunal, this is an employment contract. So I think there are some middle grounds developing, and I think it's the sort of thing that I'm sure the UKHCA, I know, is working on, and we, the beauty about this organisation is everyone can come together and work through the Anthony Collins and others. I sound like an advert for Anthony Collins there. Yeah, but there are flexible mechanisms out there, and we don't all have to start from scratch. We can share that information and come up with a viable way forward. But variable hours contracts with options has really been working well for us.
And Jane?
Yeah, just to say, we've got a range of contracts. So we've got some people on full-time permanent contracts and right through to 0 hours. And I think Steve's answer is probably the best one. We did have a foray into paying, having contracts for shifts, but we found that just shed loads of money, because the work patterns in dom care, we peak between 7 and 10, and then maybe nothing much will happen for a couple of hours, and then it'll peak again. So you're paying people for times when you're getting no income, and you can't sustain that. So I think that the idea of having 16, 20 hours a week, so there's some guaranteed income there, but then that can be flexed to meet customer needs and business needs. It's probably the way forward. But I think it's having a menu of options that the workforce can choose from that works for them and makes them want to stay.
But fundamentally, I think we've all tried different contracts, and unless the terms and conditions under which they work out with the shorter visits and with the commissioning practices changes, that is by far the bigger issue for them than what contract they're on, yes, as long as they've got employment rights under that.
Okay, I think one of the problems with 0 hours, of course, is that those two words sum up a wide variety of practice, and as is often the case, the government will take the narrowest interpretation of the worst practice in 0 hours contracts and assume that that's what we're talking about, and of course we're not in our field.
Well, if they paid travel time, it would make a whole lot of difference, wouldn't it, properly,
Indeed. Which is a whole other issue, for which I'm afraid we don't have time. Could we thank the panel, please?